This poem is not just about a personal tragedy. It is about this opposition between the two ideas. You don't get disillusioned because somebody has died. You get disillusioned because somebody breaks a promise. Hello and welcome to Nibblepop. Today in this video, we are going to go through the poem Daddy by Sylvia Plath and discuss different themes and issues in the poem. In many universities, this poem is prescribed in semester 3 under American Literature, and in some other universities, you find this poem in the syllabus of semester 5 under Gender and Women's Writing. Therefore, chances are that you have this poem in your syllabus, and this video is going to be very important. So don't skip anything, watch till the end, because first we will be doing a thorough textual reading of the whole poem, and then we will talk about different issues. This is Monami Mukherjee. Welcome once again. Now, before going into the text, let's just have a very short understanding of Sylvia Plath's life, who she was, and why is she so relevant. Sylvia Plath was born in America in the year 1932. Her father, Otto Plath, was an entomologist, and he used to teach biology in the Boston University. She had a brother called Warren, and her father, he died when she was only 8 years old, and she was mostly brought up by her mother. She showed exceptional intellectual power and intelligence even when she was very young, and she went on to develop her literary career from a very young age. However, her genius was tarnished by severe attacks of depression, and she often tried to kill herself. Her first suicide attempt was as early as in 1953, and then she went through a lot of psychiatric treatment. Eventually, she went to the University of Cambridge under a Fulbright scholarship. There she met this promising poet Ted Hughes, who eventually became the poet laureate. They fell in love, got married, had kids, but there were problems in their marriage. She found out that he was having an affair. Unable to handle her suffocating depression, she took her own life in the year 1963. So she died before she saw her 31st birthday. In her poems, we see the reflection of all kinds of experimentations that were introduced by poets like Dylan Thomas and T.S. Eliot. She was a fan of these poets, especially Dylan Thomas and Yeats, and she consciously wrote to introduce her own individual themes within the new model of poetry that was being developed during her times. With this background, let's move on to the poem. This poem is titled Daddy. So naturally, we have some expectations from the poem. Written by a daughter, usually the account of a father is full of love and veneration and gratitude. That is what we expect, right? But let's see how our expectations are met in the poem, or how she subverts them. Now, I need to give you just a few points about her father, which will be important for us to understand the meaning of different things she is writing in this poem. First, she had lost her father when she was very young, at the age of 8. Second, he was not an American by birth. He was born in a place called Brabourne in Germany, and he had immigrated to America. Although he became a professor in the Boston University, people still thought that he bore Nazi sentiments and he was a supporter of Hitler, and he was discriminated against. And third is, he died due to amputation of his leg. His friend had died of lung cancer, and when he himself developed a problem in his leg, which was because of diabetes, he miscalculated or misunderstood and thought that he was also probably having cancer and was scared to go to the doctor. So the situation became worse, and eventually the doctors had to perform surgery, amputate his leg, cut off his leg, his toe, but could not save him. There was an infection, and due to that complication, he eventually died. With these facts in mind, let's now approach the poem itself. Daddy, you do not do any more. Black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achoo. Now, when you read these lines aloud, you feel like there is no rhyme, right? It's like kind of free verse, but at the same time, there is a rhythm to it and almost nursery rhyme like tempo, nursery rhyme like style. Okay, and when she is writing about her daddy, she is starting with something very negative, as if she is talking about the phrases which the father used to use to admonish her. You do not do anymore. So the kind of admonishment, the kind of scolding which she used to get, those do not exist anymore. Black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot. She is trying to describe her childhood as a confined space. It was like she was living inside a black shoe, like a foot, for 30 years. Poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achoo. So she is talking about a kind of life where she is not allowed to express herself. Now let me get this straight from the very beginning itself, that this is a poem. This is not an autobiography. So let's not confuse between the poet and the narrator. We know that this is written by Sylvia Plath, but the person speaking to us in this poem is an arbitrary person. We don't know yet that this person is a woman, right? So we will look at the text without thinking about Sylvia Plath for once. It is a child who had grown up in fear, in suffocation, thinking that expressing oneself is against the norms. Daddy, I have had to kill you. That's a very violent thing she's saying here. You died before I had time. So had you not died, I would have killed you. That's the kind of meaning which comes out of these lines. Marble heavy, a bag full of God. Ghastly statue with one grey toe big as a fresco seal. The father has died, and therefore the father is buried beneath a marble gravestone, a marble monument, and now this daughter cannot reach the father. And what had the father been for the daughter? He had been a bag full of God. Usually we associate God with benevolence, we associate God with everything that is good. But when you call somebody a bag full of God, this is a very disturbing image. Perhaps she's trying to refer to the fact that when somebody dies, then the body is brought in a body bag, or perhaps the body itself is like a bag, your skin is like the bag which contains all your emotions, your intellect, your perceptions. And in case of this father, he was full of high principles. He always used to tell others what is right and what has to be done. So he was like this God-like presence in their lives. And now his body is just buried under a marble stone. Ghastly statue with one grey toe. So now this is imagination. Of course, there is no statue of the father anywhere except in the mind of the daughter. And this statue has one grey toe big as a fresco seal. A seal is this sea animal with very fat body, and she's comparing the foot of the father with the seal, which is not a very graceful or beautiful animal, at least not in conventional poetic images. But the impression she wants to give is that of hugeness. and a head in the freakish Atlantic where it pours bean green over blue in the waters of beautiful Nauset. I used to pray to recover you, Akhtu. So this imagined figure of the father, whose toe is as big as a seal, this figure has the head in the Atlantic coast, and this gives a kind of a huge expanse. She's talking about these coastal places stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and she is referring to this place called Nauset. And Nauset is an old name for a town in Cape Cod where her father had arrived when he had come from Germany to America. So that is why when she's talking about her father, that imagined statue of her father, she is seeing him stretching from Nauset to Atlantic, which means that his presence is like this all-encompassing thing. Her entire memory of childhood is filled with this figure of the father. And what kind of figure was that? What kind of memory is that? Let's look at that first. She says that she used to pray to recover her father, which means that, like every loving daughter, she wanted her father to get well. But as we know from the biographical facts, he died. In the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, but the name of the town is common, my Polak friend. She uses this word ach du, which is German, and it means yes, you, deliberately, because her father, he was from Germany. And if you notice the year, the timeline of Sylvia Plath's life, then if she's talking about the time her father was alive and suffering with diabetes, this was sometime around 1940s. So during that time, it was the Second World War which was raging, and Germany was gaining ground, Hitler was gaining power, and people with German origins, they might have had some feeling of empathy with the way in which Hitler was projecting the German people as pure and chosen people. Okay. So this use of German language is a deliberate reference to the German background of her father. So in the first three stanzas, what we have seen, that this narrator or this poetic persona who is speaking to us is talking about her father, who had been a very dominating presence in her childhood, and now he has ceased to exist. He doesn't exist anymore. But for 30 years, this woman, she is not able to get rid of this memory. And then she develops this German connection even further in the fourth stanza. In the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars. So when Germany tried to occupy Poland, there were a lot of casualties, people were killed, destruction everywhere. And she is referring to those catastrophic incidents where the towns were, kind of bulldozed with tanks and ammunition and destruction. But the name of the town is common, so it doesn't matter which town she's talking about. My Polak friend says, there are a dozen or two. Now, one more thing I want you to notice, this you probably have noticed till now in the previous stanzas also, especially in the second stanza, you see that the stanza ends abruptly and then it continues in the third stanza, as if it's a continuation. The stanza flows down to the next. Here also, you see that she ends the fourth stanza with the word my Polak friend, which is not, of course, a complete sentence, and it doesn't make any sense here. But usually when a stanza ends in a poem, we see it's the end of a sentence, or at least it's a natural pause. But here it does not end, it continues to the next stanza. And in the next stanza she says, my Polak friend says there are a dozen or two. So there are a dozen or two Polish towns which were destroyed by German attacks. So I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. So no communication was there between the daughter and the father, and she could never actually know what was his real origin. I mean, from exactly which town he came. Now, when a person goes from one country to another as an immigrant, especially under conditions of war, under conditions of partition, then there is always this feeling of loss associated with it. You don't go because you're ambitious, you want to try your fortune in a new land. It's because you are running away from something. And in most cases, the place from where you run away never leaves your consciousness. You constantly want to go back to that place. This is the crisis of people of the partition. This is the crisis of the people of Germany who had to leave Germany during that Great War. But why is Sylvia Plath, or why is this poetic persona so obsessed with the idea of identifying the root of the father? I never could talk to you, the tongue stuck in my jaw. Why couldn't she speak to her father? It stuck in a barbed wire snare. Now, barbed wires are usually these metallic wires with spikes, and if she wanted to speak to her father, it felt like her tongue was stuck in a barbed wire. Ish, 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 ish. I could hardly speak. Now, this word ICH, it means I in German. So when you fumble while speaking, when you get stuck while speaking, how do you speak? You just say, I. So that is what she's saying here, that when she wanted to talk to her father, she could not form the sentences. She was stammering and stuttering, and she couldn't make any sense. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. Her father, being from Germany, must have tried to teach his children his native language. It's very natural. You see, when anybody goes to another country, has children there, it's natural for them to try to teach them their own language. It's like preserving the tradition. But Sylvia, or this poetic persona, who was born in America, never could identify with this German language, and she felt that this language was obscene. And in the next stanza, she continues to talk about the German language. An engine, shuffling me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. She's calling a language an engine of torture, of oppression. And this engine reminds her of those trains in which the Jews were packed and sent to these concentration camps in Dachau, Auschwitz, and Belsen. Auschwitz was in Germany-occupied Poland, whereas Dachau and Belsen were in Germany. And we all know that during the Second World War, how Hitler oppressed the Jews, slaughtered them. It's called a mass, genocide. And this image of trains packed with Jews, this image is a recurrent image of human insensitivity, of everything that is satanic, everything that is so against the modern way of thinking. And this image of trains filled with Jews packed to the concentration camps to be killed, this image comes in the context of a language which a daughter has to use to talk to her father. Why? Because she feels that if she has to use a language which she doesn't want to use, then she is forced, just like those Jews who were forced to be dragged to those concentration camps. And in her disgust with this language, because it was imposed on her, in her disgust with the language, she is turning so anti-German that she is becoming a Jew. The snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna, are not very pure or true. Now, this idea of purity, it is very important in context of Hitler. Why? Because Adolf Hitler, he had this theory that, the Aryans were the chosen people, the pure people, the correct race to, dominate everybody, to rule over everybody. They were the highest in the ladder of evolution. Non-Aryans were, lower, and they must be crushed. So this was Hitler's idea. And he was completely against the idea of interracial marriages where pure Germans or pure blood Germans got in a relationship with any Jew or any other race, because that would spoil the blood. That was his idea. So purity was something of extreme importance within the ideology of Adolf Hitler. But why is she mentioning these places? Tyrol is supposed to be, it's a place in the Alpine mountain region, which is like close to Germany, but not exactly there. And this place, Vienna, is of course, this is a place where Hitler had been when he was young. And Hitler was not born in Germany. Hitler was born in Austria. So maybe she's trying to say that, well, the person who is propagating this whole idea of purity was a person who was not even born in Germany. And how does she evaluate herself? Is she a purebred in that sense? Which means that her father being a German and her mother being an American, is she a purebred person? With my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck and my tarot pack, I may be a bit of a Jew. So she is talking about this purity because she thinks that following this kind of racial logic, racist logic, she is not a purebred person. She is like this Jewish gypsy who believes in magic and astrology and tarot pack, and she has this weird luck. She deliberately uses the word weird, which is associated with witches and witchcraft. So she does not fit into the pattern or the kind of normalcy that her father would have expected her to fit into. Therefore, she finds herself in a diametrically opposing or conflicting position, challenging the father's high principles of purity, of ethnicity. I have always been scared of you. With your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygook. Luftwaffe is the German Air Force. So this father was very proud of the military prowess of the Germans probably. But at the same time, she's using the nonsense word gobbledygook, which means that for her or in her ears, the high sounding word Luftwaffe was as nonsense as gobbledygook. And your neat mustache and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, oh you. In the description that she is giving of her father, the neat mustache, the Aryan eye, bright blue, there is an uncanny similarity with, Adolf Hitler himself. And therefore we see that she is kind of identifying her father with not just this autocratic tyrant, but also the tank drivers, the panzer men, who used to drive these war tanks, who bring about a lot of destruction. So here we see a daughter talking about a father almost as a metaphor of a worldview which she cannot approve of. The worldview which is based on racism, the worldview which is based on oppression. So this is the kind of impression we are getting of the father here. And let's see what kind of a monster she turns him into now. Not God, but a swastika. So black no sky could squeak through every woman adores a fascist. The boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. Earlier she had said that her father was a bag full of God. And now she is saying that not God, but a swastika. swastika was that symbol of Adolf Hitler. Basically, swastika is a symbol from Vedic, Sanskritic culture. But what Hitler did, he took that symbol of swastika and he inverted it. This swastika is a black swastika. Black because there's this recurrent use of black in the poem, right? Black is everything which is abusive, which is destructive, and she is using this word repetitively to carry a point across. So this swastika, which represents Hitlerism, if I can invent a word for everything that Hitler represents. This swastika was so all-encompassing in her childhood that no sky could squeak through. They could not see any world beyond this worldview of her father. And then she says that every woman loves a fascist. Who's a fascist? A fascist is a person who oppresses, is an anarchist, thinks that his word is the word of God. Hitler was a fascist. And here she is talking about personal fascism, where a man oppresses a woman and the woman kind of likes being oppressed. She thinks that every woman adores a fascist. Why? Because fascism is a kind of power which a man holds over a woman, and women sometimes have admiration for that kind of power. They feel protected by it. So they follow these rules which are set. You don't call a man a fascist because he is beating his wife. You call him a fascist even when he's setting up rules which she has to follow but he doesn't. And it is correct also, because often we see that within this patriarchal system, usually women are the agents of patriarchy. They carry on these, rules and regulations. They impose on the next generation of women what is the right way to live like a woman. They perpetuate patriarchy more than men. So there is an admiration for this kind of fascism, this kind of suppression, and therefore she feels that her father's power in the home was admired because women admired that kind of power. You stand at the blackboard, Daddy. In the picture, I have a few. Her father, being a university teacher, it was natural for her to have a picture like that. A cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that. In Christian mythology, it's believed that the devil or Satan, imagined as a goat at times, has a cleft in his foot. So naturally, if her father is the devil, then he must have had a cleft in his foot. But no, he had a cleft in his chin. And then she suddenly talks about something totally different. No, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. Now she is talking about a black man who had broken her heart. So her father is no less than devil, and her father is no less than a black man who has broken her heart. So while talking about Daddy, this poetic persona has moved on to talk about another person, a black man. Black as in evil man, not as in a non-white man. So there is nothing racist about her. She's using this word black to mean a white guy. We'll come to that. I was 10 when they buried you. At 20, I tried to die. Sylvia Plath's father died when she was 8 years old. But she's saying, I was 10 when they buried you. Well, I have already told you this is not Sylvia Plath talking. This is the poetic persona talking. So, in the course of writing about the daddy, Sylvia Plath is also creating a daughter. This is very important. So the daughter who is speaking here lost her father when she was 10, and at 20 she tried to kill herself. Why? Because she wanted to get back to him, I get back to you. I thought even the bones would do. But when you hate somebody, why would you want to get back to them? You get rid of them when they die. But she's saying that at 20 she wanted to die because she wanted to go back to the father. Probably, to have a good fight with him, because now she has gained some courage. But they pulled me out of the sack and they stuck me together with glue. And then I knew what to do. She couldn't die. She couldn't kill herself. Like, it was an unsuccessful suicide. People glued her up, and when you glue something up, you stick together with Fevicol or gum, it's not the original thing again. You don't feel like yourself again. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you. She couldn't get back to her father, so she created another father figure in her life. A man in black, not a black man, man in black with a Mein Kampf look. So Mein Kampf look refers to again the Hitler look, because the book or the autobiography which Hitler wrote, it was titled Mein Kampf. And therefore, the man she's talking about, he had that kind of look which Hitler had, and a love of the rack and the screw, torture instruments. So was he abusive? Yes, we don't know if physically or not from this poem at least, but this man was definitely abusive. And I said, I do, because women love facets, women love men in power. So daddy, I'm finally through. So I wanted you back in life, and I have you back in life in the shape of this man who is as abusive as you were. The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. The telephone, being black, is not just any ordinary real life telephone here. It's like a channel of communication which she thought she had with her father, through which voices wormed through. When you use the word worm, it is not a very comforting word. When she had this channel of communication, even with this dead father, it was like wormy words were creeping to her. And now that she has this real life dad replacement in her life, that telephone or the channel of communication does not exist anymore. So technically she has killed the memory of her father, because that communication has stopped. If I have killed one man, I have killed two. But then, since the man she is with now, or she chose to be with, was very similar to this father figure, therefore the moment she kills the father, she also kills this husband. Here killing is of course in a metaphoric sense. Killing here means stopping all communication. That person doesn't exist for you. The vampire who said he was you. Now, it's often believed that women have a lot of admiration for their fathers, and they look up to the father as the role model. And in the psychoanalytic theories of Freud, followed by Jung, it was specifically stated that women always try to get back to their father and consider their mothers or mother figures as their competitors, rather sexual competitors. Okay, this is dark and gloomy stuff. In other words, when you grow up with a man in the family, you tend to have these ideas of masculinity associated with that figure, which means that whatever your father does has a lot of impression on your mind. And when you look for a partner, you subconsciously want those qualities in your partner, because that kind of gives you the comfort which you had felt when you were a child. So this is the basic idea, which is theoretically also called the Electra complex, because, well, that's a different story altogether. I'm not going into the details. It's a Greek legend written a lot about. In short, Electra was the figure who represented for later generation of poets, writers, philosophers, psychoanalysts. Electra represents a kind of desire for the father, an antipathy towards the mother. So it is not very unnatural for this poetic persona to have looked for her father in the partner, and the partner could convince her to get married to him because he could convince her that he was like her father. The vampire who said he was you, so he's directly calling this man a vampire. A vampire, well, it's not the vampire of Twilight. It's not a heroic figure at all. It's a very evil and dark figure. The Dracula of Bram Stoker, the vampire who used to, suck blood and kill people and torture them. And this evil figure of abuse is associated with the husband here and drank my blood for a year. So she has been suffering for a year, and then she corrects herself. 7 years, if you want to know. Sylvia Plath was married to Ted Hughes for 7 years. Autobiographical links are very, very expected in a poem like this. Daddy, you can lie back now. So I'm done with you. I thought I could get somebody like you in my life, and I saw that he was drinking my blood, literally, like abusing me physically, and I don't think I have anything else to say to you right now. There's a stake in your fat black heart. According to these legends, vampire legends, you kill a vampire by putting a stake through his heart. And she feels that her father, being as much a vampire as her husband, was killed by these villagers, and the villagers never liked you. They are dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through. Whew. She is ending all channels of communication with the father, with this final identification of the father with the vampire. And then she says, you bastard, I'm through. In these 80 lines, she had used this word daddy only like 3-4 times. In the last line, she's repeating, daddy, daddy. And then that explosion of anger, you bastard, I'm through. What do we make of this poem? We make of this poem that there's this angry, this vampirish father who was like, very oppressive person, and this girl child was brought up in a confined way. She felt like she was a foot in a boot, and then she met this another vampirish man who abused her like her father did, and now she's getting rid of both of them in her memory, and that's it. So it's a confession of oppression that this woman have faced all through her life. So that's a straightforward way of looking at the poem. But what if we don't look at it in a straightforward way, but in a way which Sylvia Plath herself might have intended? Now first I want you to look at some words in the poem. Words like foot, boot, black shoe, tongue, heart. So we have these different fragmented body parts mentioned in the poem. But the most recurrent word which we have is the foot. Now this is very ironical because Otto Plath died of gangrene after amputation of his foot. For Plath, her father could not have represented a magnified image of a foot, or because he simply had to cut it off. But what we see is she is creating not just an image of the foot, she is magnifying it. So was she creating an image which was quite opposite to reality? That makes us think about the character of the father which is emerging before us in the poem. This poem may be seen as a process of creating a persona for us. And the major problem she faces while creating this persona is the problem of communication. I cannot speak to you, my tongue gets stuck, I want to get back at you, the wires of the telephone are cut. So everywhere we see an anxiety of not being able to communicate to this father figure. But what does she want to ask her father? What is it that she wants to know? Now, let me take you back to the stanza where she talks about this Polak friend and Polish town. Otto Plath, he was born in Grabau, which is thought to be in Germany. Now, Grabau is a very common name, place name, and there's a place called Grabau in Germany, there's a place called Grabau in Poland, and as the poem says, like almost dozens of towns. So she is never sure from which Grabau her father came, from Germany or from Poland. Why is this important? Because Poland was occupied by Germany. So, German soldiers, they destroyed many Polish towns, and Poland here represents the victim country. If her father had come from Poland, then he definitely does not fit into the figure of the tyrannical German oppressor. The reason why she is so obsessed to know about whether her father was from Germany or Poland is because if he was from Germany, he would be an oppressor, and if he was from Poland, he would be as much a victim as herself. So was he really a tyrant? Or because women love tyrants, the memory was somehow distorted in the daughter? Now, we have seen in case of novel like The Bell Jar, which she wrote, that memory is seen through a filter. Okay, so we can never actually recreate our childhood experiences without some filter working. And that distorts the reality. So could it have been the case that this daughter's memory of the father had been distorted through filters of other women, or should I say, the other woman in her life? Aurelia Plath, her mother. During the course of her psychiatric treatment before her university days, she spoke to this psychiatrist saying that she hates her mother, and she in fact wanted permission to hate her. And the psychiatrist says, yes, you are permitted to hate your mother. In her Tongues of Stone, she actually talks about strangling the mother. Why so much hatred? Well, one reason could be this, that it was her mother who did not allow her to visit her father's grave for a long period of time till she was grown up. Maybe she did that to protect her memory. She wanted to protect the little girl, but it backfired on her. She felt that she was denied this right, and when she eventually managed to go to her father's grave, after that she wrote a very interesting poem, Electra on Azalea Path. So who is Electra? Electra was this Greek character who has become a symbol of a theory, psychoanalytic theory, which says that every daughter feels a kind of fascination for the father and sees the mother as an antagonist or a competitor. It's more like an extension of the Oedipus complex, where there is this fascination for the mother found in sons. Now, these are all Freudian concepts later developed by Jung, but these ideas were very much relevant to people like Sylvia Plath, who always had this fascination for the father, especially because the father was absent. And I'm going to just quote a line or two from Azalea Path. She says towards the end of the poem, I borrow the stilts of an old tragedy. She's referring to the tragedy of Electra. Then she continues, Oh, pardon the one who knocks for pardon at your gate, father, your hound bitch, daughter, friend. It was my love that did us both to death. In this poem, there is regret of not having the father with her while she was growing up. And she seeks forgiveness because she has also gone through a phase of extreme darkness, her attempted suicide and suffering. And she seeks pardon. And she's talking about love here, and feels that it was her love for her father which made her try to commit suicide, because she wanted to get back to him, to win over that loss. She calls herself his daughter and his friend, and he is referred to as the father. She's not using the word daddy here. So who is this tyrant in the poem? Why is this so much difference between this figure of the father emerging in Sylvia Plath and the figure of the father emerging in Daddy. Now look at the first sentence of this poem. So she is saying that you do not do anymore. Therefore, this concept of inaction, not being able to do something, is associated with the order or the command of the father. And later in the poem, look at this short statement, I do. And there's a repetition here too. I do, I do. This refers to the marriage promise or marriage vow when Christians get married to each other and they are asked whether they want to get married to this person, and then they say, I do. So marrying Ted Hughes was something where she exercised her choice. Then she says that this man in black with a Mein Kampf look broke her heart. She never says that the father broke her heart. Whenever she is using some harsh word or expression or her reaction to the father, try to see if she is really talking about the father or could it be somebody else she's talking about. For example, when she says, I have always been scared of you with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygook, and your neat moustache, and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, etc. We can never be certain that she is actually talking about the father here. She is talking about that man in black with the Mein Kampf look, perhaps, her husband Ted Hughes, or even Adolf Hitler. So she is talking about every man who represents this tyrannical attitude, who represents this voice of command, and she is never specifically mentioning her father here. So there are many images superimposed on each other here. You know, the image of the father getting superimposed on the image of the husband, getting superimposed on the image of Hitler. Why is this necessary? Focus on the title. The title is Daddy. Apparently, if we look at it, we will say that yes, it's her father she's talking about, the daddy. Now tell me one thing. The father was dead when she was 8. She was writing this poem when she was almost 30. It had been ages since she has addressed her father using the word daddy. Now she was writing this poem at a time when her daughter was already born, Sylvia Plath's daughter. And it's very natural that she constantly heard this child refer to her husband, that is Ted Hughes, as daddy. So when she uses the word daddy, her immediate memory, which means that something which is going on then, which in computer terms you can say random access memory. Her random access memory is linking the word daddy to Ted Hughes because he is being called daddy all the time in the house. Second is, in Sylvia Plath, she doesn't call her father daddy. She calls him father. This word daddy is a term of endearment, emotional bonding. And at the same time, bringing back that Electra complex thing, there is a hint of sexual attraction in that word, perhaps. So somehow this word is more naturally attached to Ted Hughes, the daddy in her life right now, than it is attached to her real father, Otto Plath. Now I'm going to talk about an interview in 1962 with Peter Orr, where she says that, Sylvia Plath says that, I believe that one should be able to control and manipulate experiences, even the most terrific, like madness, being tortured with an informed and intelligent mind. Personal experience is very important, but it certainly shouldn't be a kind of shut box and mirror-looking narcissistic experience. I believe it should be relevant. This means that if a poet has any experience of anxiety, torture, mental health issue, or any kind of violence in life, then it's okay to use that in literature, in poetry and stories. But that should be manipulated. So you don't just write what has happened, you manipulate it with an intelligent mind. And if you look at the original manuscripts of her poems, even of Daddy, you would see that she made numerous corrections and alterations. She struck off words and replaced them with other words. So she believes in editing her own poems. It's not like the Wordsworthian, spontaneous overflow kind of a writing she is believing in. She is a post T.S. Eliot writer. She is a fan of W.H. Auden. And therefore, when she writes her experience, she is definitely manipulating them. She thinks that that is the craft of writing poetry. Poetry is a strenuous exercise of your intellectual power. Now, because she was a fan of W.H. Auden, I'll just give you 4 lines from the poem In Memory of W.B. Yeats, which Auden wrote, where he is talking about this, exactly the same thing. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse, sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. So you have to farm your emotions. You have to churn it. Only then you can bring out something which is called poetry. So it's not that straightforward that her father oppressed her and here, there's this poem, Daddy. No, she is creating this poem out of the experiences she has had. And these experiences all culminate in, it's like this boiling pot of the witches where they throw in these ingredients and make that magic potion. This is the magic potion she is creating. If she was that oppressed as a child, why would she say that in this interview in 1961? And this interview was, she gave this interview along with her husband in BBC. And when she is asked about her childhood, she's saying, I think I was happy up to the age of about 9, very carefree, and I believed in magic. And then she says, and then at 9, I was rather disillusioned. And she continues, and became depressed, didn't have a happy adolescence. When she was young, at the age of 8 or something, 7 or 8, she wrote her first poem, and the name of the poem was Poem. And during that time, she used to write on bees and birds and happy things, like happy children do, with uncomplicated lives. So why does she need this masquerade? If Ted Hughes was abusing her, which he was, she even had a miscarriage, because of the abuse and all. And there was this additional emotional abuse, which was a part of this whole thing. So if he was abusing her, why didn't she straight away write that? For one thing, yes, that was this Auden-esque concept of masking everything. But deep down inside, she knew that if she was straightforward about it, if she actually became more clear in the poem, then this poem might have been even destroyed by Ted Hughes. I am not making stories here. He did destroy many of her works. This poem was published after the death of Sylvia Plath. And Ted Hughes, with all respect to his intelligence and intellectual capacity, could not read through the lines perhaps and thought that, okay, this is about her father, about this Electra complex, let the world know that she was a mad woman, let it get published with. And Sylvia Plath was successful to fool her husband. Ted Hughes knew that he is being referred to as a Hitler-like man and that their marriage was not a happy marriage, but he was okay with this because everybody knew that their marriage had failed. But he primarily thought that this was about Otto Plath, and that is why probably this poem is still existing. I'm not creating a monster out of this poet laureate, Ted Hughes. You will have beautiful poems in your syllabus written by Ted Hughes. I am a fan of his poem Thought Fox, and there are many such beautiful lines he wrote, but those are his poetic creations. Let's not confuse between the poet and the man. The suffocation she's writing about, this suffocation. She's saying that it's going on for 30 years, like she's still suffocated. So how can this be the suffocation created by the father? Of course, this is the suffocation created by the father, who is the father to her children. Of course, she's talking about a daddy. She's talking about a father, but maybe not her father. And she feels that experience of a person is not significant, not relevant, unless and until it is kind of universalized down the generations. Her hatred for her mother is because this mother represents that father figure for her, probably, represents that voice of patriarchy for her. It's a clash between not individuals, but between ideas that those individuals represent. A person can be a woman and be patriarchal. A person can be a man and be receptive and sensitive, things which are associated with women. Now, with our improved consciousness of gender and gendering, we understand these things. So her experience of father, which had been a very limited experience because she was so young when he had died, her experience of what a father is was more because of her experience of the fatherhood of dukes. And talking about this lasting effect on generations, you will be surprised to know that, and it's a very sad thing too, that Sylvia Plath's son, though much later, after 2006 or something, he committed suicide, hanging from a noose. Depression is something which flows down through generations. But I was very happy to find out that the daughter of Sylvia Plath, Frida, she has survived her depression. Of course, she had dark phases. She still has to cope with them. But she has emerged as a winner through her painting, through her wonderful verse. If you have the time, you can visit her website and you would be amazed at the kind of paintings she does and the kind of writings that are on display on the website. Sylvia Plath could not cope with this depression. But this poem is not just about a personal tragedy. Thematically, it is about this opposition between the two ideas, the ideas of masculinity and the ideas of femininity. These recurrent images of war, swastika, the figure of the Hitler, the boot, the statement "you do not do," violence, all these represent the masculine, the logical, the assertive, something which has agency or the power to perform. And on the other hand, we have this feeling of being scared, suffocated, victimized, silenced, unable to speak, feminine, which is represented by this gypsy, non-conventional, tarot card bearing, almost witch-like persona of the speaker. So it's like this eternal conflict between the eternal masculine and the eternal feminine. Masculinity always represents this conventional idea, setting the rules, the roots of patriarchy. And feminine, the gypsy-minded feminine, is always going against the rules. Now, how is this theme reflected through the language of the poem? In the poem, we see that whenever this masculine figure is described, it is described in terms of strong language. But the voice speaking is an infantile voice, a childish voice, as if the figure of the woman is belittled, made small, and the figure of the man is turned into a giant. So all the historical references she is using, all the personal experiences she is using, she is doing them to bring about this conflict, this rebellion against suffocation against oppression. The symbols she uses are all about this conflict. Either they are symbols of violence, the barbed wire, the tanks and the wars and the destroyed towns, the effect of male ego and dominance, and how there is this lack of communication between the masculine side and the feminine side. This is not the rejection of Sylvia Plath's father. This is not something which she is doing to hurt her father, get away from him. No. She is trying to talk about the lack of communication between these two different worldviews. The snows of Tyrol are not so pure, which means that you think that something represents pure, sublime perfection, and then you see that it is not so. This disillusionment is not about her father. This is more certainly about the disillusionment she had when she saw that her husband was having an affair, that the words of poetry they wrote to each other in their courtship, they had been meaningless. That is disillusionment. You don't get disillusioned because somebody has died. You get disillusioned because somebody breaks a promise. You don't get angry because your father has failed to live. You feel angry because your mother won't let you accept the fact. I could not see any anger in her for her father in the poem. If you feel that she is angry with her father, please tell me how. Of course she is angry of her fatherlessness. But how can a daughter be actually angry with a father who is seeking forgiveness in some other poem because she was trying to kill herself and get back to him? Now you would tell me that she's calling the father a bastard. Sylvia Plath is using that word to mean so many things. Taking at face value, this is a curse word, an expletive, a foul language example, fine. But I have already told you that Sylvia Plath is not an emotional writer. She is a meticulous writer. So she deliberately uses that word. What does this word actually mean? It means a person without the name of the father. So when she is using the word bastard, she is hitting at the very root of her father's pride, his origins. But if she is not sure if he was German or Polish, how can she say he has a fixed root? Within her perspective, her father is rootless, and that makes him a bastard. And in calling her father a bastard, this poetic persona is disassociating herself from her German connections. And she is prioritizing her gypsy origins. She wants to choose her identity. And therefore, she has to call the father a bastard. And if you say that no, she's not thinking so much, it's just an expression, then it's an expression of anger against the fact that the father is gone. It's like, daddy, daddy, oh, you bastard, you're gone. What will I do with my life now? So from both these perspectives, I'm doubtful how this word is proving that her father was a tyrant. If anybody emerges as a tyrant in the poem, it is the heroic white patriarch whom her children call daddy. When the novel The Bell Jar was published, it was published under a pseudonym, Victoria Lucas. What I don't understand is, if you are married to a man who becomes the poet laureate of a country, why do you have to publish under a pseudonym? Pseudonyms are for people like Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, living in the Victorian age, or George Eliot, when the world was not ready, yet to accept things that women have moved on. But wife of Ted Hughes writing under a pseudonym, who writes under a pseudonym, ask yourselves. A person who wants to hide who she is. because she's scared of people in her life. Daddy is a poem about loss and grief and anger against all those agents of oppression, all those agents of tyranny which has kept Sylvia Plath away from her father and which has been destructive for her psyche. If you're preparing this poem for any exams, you need to talk about this figure of the tyrant who is created in the poem. And if you think that my interpretation is more logical, then don't feel scared to write this down. I don't understand why for so many years people have always tried to prove that her father was the Hitler. But don't go with the flow. Think for yourself. Think about the things that I have told you. Tell me in the comments if you think that there are things I have missed. You might be asked questions on the title. You might be asked questions on the symbols, on the theme of feminism and gender stereotypes and gender conflicts. And you might be asked on the concept of American poetry emerging. It all depends on which paper this poem is prescribed under. But no matter what the question is, try to illustrate your point based on facts and based on the lines of the poem. And I'm sure you will discover truths which even I might have missed. It was wonderful to share my views on this poem with you. I would be very happy to get inputs from you. Subscribe to stay connected. Share with your friends if you have liked this. I promise to come back with a video very soon again. Till then, stay happy, stay safe. Bye-bye.